So our first presentation is going to be, or conversation, I should say, is with Julie. And Julie, I'm going to let you just introduce yourself and your project, and feel free to let me know when you want me to move ahead in your slides.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for getting us all together. It's great to see everybody here this morning. My name is Julie O'Brien. I work for Optum Health in the compliance division over compliance and risk management. And I graduated CLU in December of 2022. The Capstone project that I chose, oh, there's my slide. Look at that. Thank you. Oh, I should back up. So I live in outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I love reading, exercise, and college visits. I have a 16-year-old daughter, so she's a junior, so we're looking at colleges. She wants to go somewhere warm and sunny, so I don't know if I'll get her to Seattle U, but it's on the list. Um, and my capstone idea, it was to evaluate the effectiveness of a corporate compliance program in the merger and acquisition space within the healthcare industry. And the reason I chose that was because I think it's a significant area of risk. With all, there's so much merger and acquisition activity within the healthcare space. And one of the courses was with Professor Alana Croker, and she actually had us craft a checklist for a merger and acquisition. And it's just like, I loved it. It was like, I went way above and beyond. It had like 60 things on the list, and I'm sure she was like, whoa. But what I found was putting that list together really synthesized all the things that I had learned in all the other courses at Seattle U up until that point, from Professor DiMarino's courses, Professor Wilson, Professor Racky. We took all of that information that we learned, which was really issue spotting. I think that's the big thing that I took away from my time at CLU is understanding where the pitfalls are and how to get some controls in place to prevent those. So it was really that culmination of all the things I'd learned in each of the different courses around issue spotting to put into a checklist to use at the merger and acquisition table. If you can move to the next slide, please, Kelly, thank you. All right, and that risk, a big part of that risk, especially in the healthcare space, is successor liability. And I shared this because I think anytime you see something from the Department of Justice with your company's name on it, fortunately, this is not my company's name, it kind of strikes fear in your heart. So, this was a case where Genesis Healthcare had acquired 4 entities, essentially. It was really 2 acquisitions, but there were multiple entities within those acquisitions. And they, missed through the due diligence process that there were significant problems within those programs. They had been, there were 6 different whistleblower cases that eventually came out within 2 years of the acquisition, for billing for hospice services that were unnecessary, billing for therapy that was unnecessary, and then grossly substandard nursing care. And as a result of that, Genesis, even though they didn't perpetrate the fraud or the problems with the False Claims Act, it was Genesis that had to pay for those things. Going back almost 20 years, some of the issues went back that far in these acquired entities. So you've got to be really careful and understand completely what you're buying. And that can be a hard thing because a lot of times there's tight timelines and it's a lot of information. And so that's kind of why I chose this. And the idea is to, do a deep dive and figure out what we can do to prevent risk in the merger and acquisition cycle. And so the guide that I chose to create, I fashioned it around the 7 elements of an effective compliance program as published by the OIG. And what you see here is the most recent. The OIG, these guidelines have been around since the mid-90s, and they've kind of evolved a bit, but they've stayed essentially true to those 7 elements. This year, they finally added risk assessment as an official part of it under number 6 there, so that's pretty exciting. But the guide that I created used these basically 7 elements as chapters to help the compliance professional, risk professional go in and assess these parts of that target entity's compliance program.
I actually was going to ask about So if you are the compliance professional on the acquiring entity, right? So you're going in and you are evaluating the entity that is going to be acquired. And let's say you do the deep dive, you ask all of these questions, and um, there's reason to believe that the entity that is to be acquired is not disclosing everything. What what is your recourse then? And maybe this is a question in part to our former federal prosecutor, but what does this checklist then provide you as a backstop?
So I think the key is that you want to do it before you sign on the dotted line, right? These are the things that you're doing pre-acquisition to determine, it's kind of like the dating phase. Is this a fit for us? And so being really methodical and detailed in that review can, help you make the go, no go decision. Maybe you don't buy the company, or maybe you say, you know what, that you were going to sell it to us for 100 million, but because of the problems we found, it's only worth 50. So I think there's
Hmm.
both of those things that you can use that information. And then, the other part of it is, even if those things, if, and this does happen, people are like, oh, the powers that be still want to buy that entity. This checklist can be used after acquisition to remedy those areas of opportunity that were identified.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool.
Frank, do you have any additions to that?
Uh, yeah, I think you're spot on there, Julie. And to answer perhaps in a different way, Kelly's question, it really becomes an issue of whether or not uh, the entity disclosed or tried to conceal. If
Hmm.
they try to conceal with an intent to defraud, then obviously we've got a criminal element there. If it was just a negligent misrepresentation where they are perhaps overlooked information that they should have disclosed, that's a different issue. And it falls then into the question whether or not the acquiring company really wants to go forward. But there can be liability depending upon the contracts, either civil liability, or if there's an intent to defraud, there could be criminal liability.
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for the question, Kelly. So this is an example of one of the areas of the checklist. So this is the checklist around that first: written policies, procedures, and standards of conduct. So I identified kind of what the guiding principle is, like, why does the who cares? Why does this matter? And then developed a series of questions to help the compliance professional really dig in and review those areas of the compliance program. And the guide that goes along with the checklist is about 50 pages or so. And it has, so talking about like the code of ethics, and what is it that you're looking for in the code of ethics? Like, is it updated? Is it current? Is it tailored to the organization? Is there leadership, introducing it or endorsing it? Those kinds of questions are what you would find in the guide for each one of those elements and each one of the questions related to that element. And I think the value again is, this is a systematic review that I can do, I can work on with other people, because I think oftentimes that's where things get lost. People miss things because they think, oh, Julie's got that, and Julie thinks Frank has it, and it got between us, right? There was no goalie. So really having that systematic approach. And then the other piece that's valuable to this is, not only can you use it after the fact to remedy these things, but if you want to buy another organization, you can use this same list to identify areas that came up, or things to be careful of, and then adding things to the list. The list is customizable because every acquiring entity has different areas of risk, and you find different things as you look through the documentation and the business. And then, the purchasing entity also may have hot button, maybe they've been in trouble for something before. So they want to make sure those three things are really detailed on this list. So it just allows that, and it allows for multiple people to work on it. And, say I got sick, someone else can step in and pick up where I left off if I'm diligent about my process and the note taking.
That's pretty awesome. I love it.
Thank you. And this is kind of the closing out here. Again, it's a customizable, which it needs to be, right? It just everything in about an effective program is that it's really customized to the business. And then just that step-by-step repeatable process where others can get involved. The due diligence table, so to speak, is a group of all the leadership in the organization, the legal, the privacy, the cyber risk, the HR, the accounting people, all coming together with the same kind of review that compliance is doing. And we can share what we've learned, when we pick up something that, oh, that seems like, something's going on with the HR team, we can share that information. And so it just makes the whole team stronger. And like we talked about before, you can use these to decide, what, this isn't an acquisition that we want to continue to look at, or renegotiate the terms. And then again, if you do end up buying that company, acquiring that company, or merging, you can use this as your guide for remediation. So there's a lot of value. And I think that when you take a step back and step out of healthcare, step out of mergers and acquisitions, this type of list can be used or created for so many things, because it's about that repeatable process and documentation, which is what makes it so successful. So with that, I will ask if anyone, thank you so much for your time today. Please let me know if you have questions.
I have a question. I'm sorry, I'm in a conference, so you'll hear some background. I hope it's not too loud. Did you think about scoring, or do you think a scoring system would be helpful?
So I do think that would be a really valuable place to get to. I think the work would take a second or third capstone to do it properly, because it's, but that is something I was like, oh, it'd be great to do a heat map and do all kinds. I think there's definitely a future where this could be refined and enhanced. And that's something also that an entity can look at and see, because everyone's appetite for risk is a little bit different. Each entity is different. And so that scoring that would be kind of tailored to that entity. So great question, Margot. If you want to work on it with me, let me know.
I think we could make an audit out of there, or assessment for companies.
Let's do it.
That's a great idea. I love that.
Julie, I was just going to say you could easily turn this into, even if it's not mergers and acquisitions, but as part of our program, we do third-party risk management, and you could very easily turn that into a checklist for your vendors or suppliers.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And that was something that Frank and I talked about as I was working on my capstone, and I was just trying to really dial it in on one specific thing. And I think all of us went through that, scope creep portion of our program. But to your point, those 7 elements, they apply to everybody everywhere who's doing business in the US or with a US entity. So, I think the sky is the limit, and that it is a very, it's about that compliance program, which everybody needs to have.
And Julie, what I really like about your project is how it allows collaboration among team members and also between teams. My question kind of goes to operationally. If you apply the checklist and you discover that there's really a conflict or a discrepancy in compliance standards, how would you want to address that, either with your checklist or perhaps using some other ideas that you might have?
I mean, I think, again, it's the partnership. We don't go to the due diligence table in a merger and acquisition without our legal partners, without the other, experts in the business. And I think really when you find something like that, really dig in, get your facts straight, think about how this impacts, what is the legal risk associated with that? And sit down with your legal team and say, hey, here's what we found. I'd love to get your eyes on it and let me know what you think. And kind of, again, get your partners, get your specialists. Don't go it alone. We're stronger together. And so share that knowledge and ask people, where to go next with their expertise in addition to your own.
Right. And I think that your project really lends itself to be able to communicate with the legal team because it identifies those gaps.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
I think we have a question from one of our guests. John, I don't know if you're able to unmute and ask.
I don't really have a question, but I couldn't
Oh,
find where to ask if
well,
one
there you
comes up.
go.
So I
Sure.
wanted to confirm how you wanted to
Yeah, no
proceed.
worries. You're welcome to if something comes up.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Hi, Julie. Hi, you guys.
Hi, John. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
I think one of the things that I love about this is it starts, and you'll hear this in many of our projects. It's something we talk about a lot in the program, the role of the compliance officer as the communications facilitator, right? You end up being this kind of like hub of a wheel that's working with, Julie's pointing out, you're working with HR, you're working with, finance, you're working with all of these teams, and you end up being able to piece together different components around what's going on in different departments. And I think that even though that's not necessarily a legal role, it can be because you end up being this issue spotting person. And it's truly the crux of like where the law meets business, right? If you're able to spot those legal issues. So I think it's an interesting perspective, right? If you've got this checklist or whatever that looks like in any business solution scenario, right? Um, to be able to methodically move through this like issue spotting analysis really highlights that communications piece. Awesome. Well, thank you, Julie.